In the sweeping, monumental annals of the Second World War, a conflict that tore the 20th century in two and remains the most documented cataclysm in human history, few figures loom as large or cast a shadow as profound as Winston Churchill. From the moment he ascended to the premiership in the beleaguered spring of 1940, just as the German blitzkrieg was carving up Western Europe, until the triumphant, weary summer of 1945, the British Prime Minister was more than a political leader. He was the indispensable commander, the chief strategist, and the unwavering morale booster of a nation fighting, quite literally, for its very existence. Churchill's leadership was a colossal, non-stop engine of governance and strategy. His personal wartime output was prodigious, an endless torrent of communiques that flowed from his office. There were the rousing speeches that stiffened the resolve of a besieged people, the pointed, often furious telegrams to generals and admirals across the globe, the dense, analytical memos demanding action or demanding explanation. And, above all, there were the directives. Thousands upon thousands of these orders, often signed in his characteristic, forceful, almost stabbing hand, flowed out of the subterranean complex of the cabinet war rooms. They commanded fleets to rendezvous in the frigid North Atlantic, moved weary divisions across the sands of North Africa, authorized the mass production of the Spitfire, championed the development of radar from a crude experiment into the cornerstone of the air defense system, and spearheaded the relentless, desperate intellectual efforts to break the Axis codes at Bletchley Park. This tidal wave of documentation forms the bedrock of our understanding of the war, a visible, traceable record of Britain's struggle. But amongst this colossal tide of wartime documentation, a paper ocean charting the movements of squadrons, the allocation of every precious ton of steel, the specific instructions to intelligence services on everything from sabotage to counterfeiting, one order stood apart. It was a command that, by its very nature, sought to erase its own existence. It was not a grand strategic decree. It was a command issued at the height of Britain's peril, yet it concerned no troop movement, no aerial offensive, no new battleship design, and no calculated risk in the shadow war of espionage. It was an order of pure, almost chilling simplicity, an order to destroy a file. This was no ordinary request for quiet disposal, no routine culling of obsolete papers. It was a directive for utter annihilation, a demand that the physical record of a specific, sensitive event be not just hidden, but utterly erased, its memory purged from the official history of the British state. The file, whatever its contents, was deemed so sensitive, so explosive, so profoundly damaging, that even Churchill, a man accustomed to confronting global catastrophe daily, who routinely faced the possibility of total military defeat, feared its consequences more than he feared a failed invasion or a destroyed city. His fear was not of steel and fire, but of psychological fallout, the intellectual and emotional destabilization it could bring to a nation literally hanging by a thread. He knew the British people could withstand bombs, but he questioned if they could withstand that truth. The command, issued from the depths of the war rooms, was a desperate, tactical strike in the war of morale and confidence. The destruction had to be total, immediate, and without any vestige of a paper trail. For decades, indeed, for the majority of the subsequent century, this file was nothing more than a historical ghost, a whisper confined to the darkest corners of intelligence history and the occasional, quickly dismissed footnote in a memoir. Historians, privy to the fragmented, almost subliminal evidence of the order itself, a brief, redacted mention in a colleague's diary, perhaps, or a gap in a logbook, reluctantly concluded the mission had been successful. They believed the document, or documents, had been lost forever, meticulously reduced to ashes in a brazier in Whitehall, its secrets condemned to oblivion by the Prime Minister himself. The official records were clean, the archives silent, and the chapter was effectively closed before it was ever written. The narrative of the Second World War, as taught for generations, moved on, blissfully unaware of this carefully constructed lacuna. The world of high-stakes historical research rarely unfolds with the dramatic urgency of a wartime thriller. It operates far from the crashing waves and battlefield gunfire. Instead, it unfolds in dusty rooms, under the harsh, humming glare of fluorescent lights, amidst mountains of aging, brittle paper. And it was in just such a forgotten corner, in the slow, meticulous, often soul-crushingly tedious process of bureaucratic disclosure, that this long-lost secret finally began its journey back into the light. The year was 2024. 79 years after the end of the war, the Ministry of Defense, in accordance with the gradual, rolling declassification protocols governing once sensitive material, quietly released a massive, almost overwhelming trove of documents. These were not the celebrated, headline-grabbing records of major offensives or famous intelligence breakthroughs, which are typically released first. Instead, this release comprised the deep, often ignored administrative detritus of a gargantuan war machine. Decades of logistics manifests, minor intelligence debriefs, low-level interdepartmental queries, and the minutiae that formed the true, unglamorous bedrock of the war effort. The setting was likely a vast, anonymous, climate-controlled warehouse, a modern tomb for paper, with rows of shelving stretching into dim infinity, housing the collective paper memory of a nation's most desperate hours. Historians and researchers, used to the back-breaking, eye-straining work of sifting through this monumental historical haystack, began their methodical, unhurried search. And there, deep inside the stacks, tucked away in a larger, forgotten box marked simply, Miscellaneous Communications 1940-1941, the unexpected quarry. It was a thin brown folder, utterly devoid of any identifying label, number, or official stamp. No secret, no top priority, no date. Its perfect, deliberate anonymity was, paradoxically, its most potent defense, allowing it to survive 70 years of sorting, purging, and cataloging. It was, in effect, a ghost file, too nondescript to be noticed, too well hidden to be found. But a closer inspection by an unusually diligent or perhaps simply lucky researcher revealed the truth. Within the folder were ancillary documents, small, detached slips of paper, faint carbon copies of internal memos, and fragmented index references, which, though innocuous on their own, contained cross-references long believed to be meticulously erased. These cryptic paper ghosts spoke in coded language of a specific, unnamed, incident, and scheduled recovery, and a series of cryptic initials linked to a highly restricted, internal security classification system that had been abandoned shortly after the war. The references were all pointing to the great silence in the archives, the point where the paper trail abruptly went cold. This was it. This was the exact historical moment that Churchill had ordered to be purged. This was the file Churchill had wanted burned. Its survival was an extraordinary, almost unbelievable event. Was it an act of historical defiance? A stroke of unimaginable luck in the bureaucratic maze? Or was it, as the narrative would soon suggest, a deliberate and calculated risk taken by a single, conscientious official, the ultimate act of historical civil disobedience? Its contents, finally exposed to the scrutiny of the modern world and protected by the legal shield of declassification, began to unfurl a chapter of the war almost no one knew existed. It was the story of a shadow conflict that played out not on the muddy battlefields of France or the freezing skies over London, but in the minds of the Allied command, forcing them to make a choice between truth and the stability of the state itself. To truly understand the sheer, paralyzing panic that fueled Churchill's destructive order, the command to burn history, one must first fully immerse oneself in the claustrophobic atmosphere of Britain in late 1940. This was not merely a time of war, it was the threshold of annihilation. The calendar had flipped from the hopeful promises of the pre-war era to the grim, immediate reality of existential dread. France had fallen with a horrifying, unthinkable speed, its massive army, once considered the strongest on the continent, crushed in a matter of weeks by the terrifying, mechanized shock of the Blitzkrieg. The British Expeditionary Force (BEF) had been miraculously, yet humiliatingly, evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk in the early summer, leaving behind virtually all their heavy equipment. They returned not as a conquering force, but as an army salvaged from defeat, wounded and depleted. The island nation, the last bastion of freedom in Western Europe, stood alone. The world's greatest navy was fighting a brutal, existential battle in the Atlantic, battling German U-boats not for glory, but for the basic lifeline of food, fuel, and supplies. And, above all, the Battle of Britain was raging overhead, an epic, minute-by-minute struggle for control of the skies that defined the country's fate. The summer and autumn of 1940 were, without hyperbole, the darkest hours. Day after day, and night after night, the Luftwaffe pounded British cities, airfields, and ports in a relentless, calculated attempt to achieve air superiority, the crucial, non-negotiable precursor to Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's meticulously planned invasion of the British Isles. Every night, the wail of the air raid sirens became the nation's soundtrack, a mournful, terrifying harbinger of destruction, and every morning, the grim toll of the previous night's destruction, the lost lives, the burning factories, the shattered homes, was counted. In this scenario, morale was not a soft, secondary factor, it was the country's most precious, yet most fragile, commodity. It was the invisible shield, maintained only by Churchill's defiant, roaring speeches and the visible, heroic efforts of the young pilots of the Royal Air Force, the few who were paying a staggering personal price in the skies. It was into this cauldron of fear, defiance, and technological uncertainty that the incident occurred. The intelligence file, recovered decades later, described an event that unfolded in the late summer or early autumn of 1940, likely in the southeast of England, the very epicenter of the air war and the most heavily targeted region. The incident involved a highly dedicated RAF intelligence and technical recovery team. This unit, small and extraordinarily specialized, was tasked not with fighting the war of air combat, but with the shadow war of technology. Their grim, meticulous duty was to sift through the smoldering wreckage of downed aircraft, both Allied and Axis, to glean technological secrets before they were lost, stolen, or entirely consumed by fire and scrap. They were the forensic scientists of the war machine. On a quiet, perhaps fog-shrouded morning, the aftermath of a particularly vicious dogfight, or perhaps amidst the chaos of a freshly blitzed field in Kent or Sussex, they were called to the crash site of a downed German aircraft. The records are frustratingly sparse on the specifics. The model of the plane, a Heinkel 111, a Dornier 17, or a Messerschmitt fighter bomber. The exact location, the fate of the crew, all details meticulously suppressed or destroyed in the subsequent official purge mandated by Churchill. But the core narrative delivered to Whitehall was chillingly clear. The discovery they made on board shook the British command to its absolute core. What they found was not just another standard piece of captured equipment, not a new type of machine gun, a slightly modified radio set, or a better piece of armor plating, all of which were routine finds. The file suggests something far more devastating. A prototype device, highly encrypted documents, or undeniable evidence of a breakthrough technology that possessed the power to change the balance of the war overnight. Imagine the scene, recreated from the engineers' later, suppressed testimony. The recovery team, caked in mud and hydraulic fluid, meticulously pieces together the shattered remnants of the cockpit. The lead engineer, an expert in German avionics, uses a torch to illuminate a cavity near the navigation station. He pauses. His methodical scraping halts. He pulls out an object unlike anything seen before. It is compact, shielded, complex, and meticulously engineered, bearing the terrifying hallmark of advanced German industrial design, a stark contrast to the often hastily manufactured, mass-produced components of the early British war machine. The file suggests it may have been a gyroscopic stabilizing unit of unheard-of precision, designed to counteract turbulence and pilot fatigue, a sophisticated coded telemetry device capable of receiving multiple broadcast signals simultaneously and feeding them directly to the pilot, or perhaps, most chillingly, an early, incredibly effective precision targeting system far superior to anything the rudimentary British bombsights possessed. The accompanying documents, partially incinerated but containing enough detail to be analyzed, hinted at German testing and deployment protocols that suggested this was not an isolated, theoretical experiment, but the harbinger of a mass-produced, game-changing technology. The moment this discovery was verified and reported up the chain of command, past the technical scrutiny of the Air Ministry, through the cold analysis of MI6, and finally to the desk of the Prime Minister, the immediate danger became twofold. The tactical threat. If the Luftwaffe were fully equipped with this advanced precision system, their bombing accuracy would skyrocket. The German Nickbane and X-Garrett radio navigation systems were already causing problems, using radio beams to guide bombers. But this new device suggested a quantum leap, the ability to pinpoint targets not within a city block, but to within a few yards. This rendered Britain's decentralized defense systems useless and would allow the accelerated destruction of crucial, small, hardened targets like radar stations, key aircraft factories, command bunkers, and oil storage depots. The ability to conduct surgical strikes rather than area bombing would collapse Britain's industrial base quickly. The psychological threat. This was, for Churchill, the far more terrifying reality. The file suggests that the Prime Minister feared not merely German advancement, which was a constant, known variable that the RAF was prepared to fight, but the resulting, inevitable panic among his own people. Britain was holding on through sheer, stubborn will and the deeply ingrained, public belief that its own technological advantage, especially in areas like radar, chain home, was superior, or at least sufficient. The revelation that the enemy had quietly developed a technology that could nullify or surpass this advantage, that their bombers were not just relying on sheer numbers but on deadly, surgical precision, could have been the final, fatal straw. It could have shattered the fragile, yet resolute, confidence of a nation already staring defeat in the face. It was the moment where courage turned to defeatism. This was the true terror of the file. The command structure of wartime Britain, centered on the cabinet war rooms, was a high-pressure, intensely focused engine. Located deep beneath the Treasury building, in a warren of concrete, steel, and perpetually stale air, it was the very core of the nation's nervous system. Here, Churchill directed the global struggle, often sleeping mere feet away from the map room where the fortunes of his armies were traced in pins and string. The atmosphere was perpetually tense, the air thick with cigarette smoke, the aroma of late-night whiskey, and the omnipresent gravity of decisions that held the power of life and death for millions. It was from this bunker, in the immediate aftermath of receiving the terrifyingly specific intelligence report on the recovered German device, that the ultimate, definitive directive was issued. The few ancillary, declassified documents that reference the purge reveal a chilling piece of evidence, a memo handwritten by Churchill himself, scrawled on official paper. Its stark brevity conveys a sense of profound urgency and unmitigated fear. The ink is faded, the handwriting hurried and forceful, but the words, penned by the man who defined the war, are chillingly legible. If released, this may undo morale, see it destroyed. This was the ultimate strategic calculus of a man who understood that in 1940, the war was fought as much in the spirit and mind as it was in the sky or on the sea. Churchill was not attempting to hide minor British mistakes, of which there were many, acknowledged and catalogued in other files, but to prevent a single, devastating piece of intelligence from delivering a fatal blow to the national psyche. The decision to destroy the file was entirely strategic, rooted in the political and psychological realities of Britain standing alone against tyranny. The propaganda risk. If the intelligence of the German technological breakthrough were to leak, even in rumor, German propaganda, already masterful, brutal, and widely broadcast, would seize upon it as absolute proof of inevitable victory. One can imagine the radio broadcasts from Berlin. The mighty British Empire is defenseless. Its boasted radar is blind. Its technology is obsolete. Surrender now to avoid total annihilation before the superior guidance of the Third Reich. Such a message, backed by tangible, captured evidence, would be crippling to the will to fight. The trust deficit and loss of faith. Churchill's immense power and his ability to rally the country rested entirely on the public's belief in his resolute leadership and the unquestionable competence and heroism of the RAF. The existence of a German super weapon that could bypass current defenses would instantly suggest a catastrophic failure of intelligence, a failure of development, and ultimately, a failure by the government to protect its people. This trust deficit could easily trigger mass defeatism, a flight from the cities into the rural safety of the West, and a collapse of civilian order that would severely hamper the war effort. The illusion of parity. At this stage, it was absolutely essential for the British public to believe they were fighting an equal, or at least unbeatable, enemy. The document suggested a technological leapfrog so vast that it would transform the conflict from a desperate but winnable struggle into a hopeless cause, transforming the necessary national defiance into paralyzing despair. Therefore, the Prime Minister deemed the existence of the file itself a strategic liability greater than any military secret it contained. The real threat was not the German device, which could eventually be counter-engineered and nullified, but the knowledge of its existence filtering down to the wrong ears. The file had to vanish, leaving no paper trail, no official confirmation, ensuring that if rumors ever surfaced, they could be officially, truthfully, and honestly denied as unsubstantiated gossip. The order was simple, absolute, and backed by the ultimate authority: destroy the file. Burn every copy. Purge the references. The overwhelming majority of the bureaucracy, fearful and loyal, obeyed. Memos were shredded, reports incinerated, index cards torn up. The incident was to be erased from the operational and administrative records of the Royal Air Force, the Ministry of Supply, and the Cabinet Office. Silence descended upon the event. But in the vast, labyrinthine, and often conflicted network of Whitehall, where idealism and a deep sense of historical duty sometimes outweighed even the orders of the Prime Minister, one officer disobeyed the order. The file, in its subsequent rediscovery, does not name him, and perhaps it is better that it doesn't. He was not a general or a celebrated figure, he was likely a middle-ranking officer, an intelligence analyst, or a technical archivist, a man of paper and facts, not of glory. He understood the immense gravity of Churchill's directive, and the crushing personal risk, potentially even facing execution for treason, of defying it in a time of total war. But he also understood the truth of history. He believed the story was too important, the German technology too significant, the truth of the British peril too vital to be sacrificed, even for the sake of necessary wartime morale. In an act of profound, quiet rebellion, he performed a subtle, clandestine operation. He secretly made a copy of the essential documents before the destruction was executed. He didn't make a formal record, he made a personal, unofficial one. He stripped the key pages, the sketches, the summaries, the most alarming intercepts, and placed them into an unmarked, thin brown folder, the very folder that survived to be recovered in 2024. He hid it deep within the general stream of low-grade classified material, likely using an obscure administrative loophole to have it filed alongside genuinely innocuous material that he knew would be left untouched and unexamined for decades. This officer, unnamed and unsung, became the single, solitary guardian of a truth that could have lost the war had it been revealed, but which now defines a pivotal, unseen moment in it. He ensured that the record of the extreme peril was preserved for the eventual judgment of history, defying his prime minister not out of malice, but out of a deeper fidelity to fact. The recovered folder is far more than a collection of old paper, it is a historical relic, a triumph of fragile survival against a prime ministerial death sentence. Its physical condition reflects its brutal history. Its contents are fragmented, scarred by heat, and difficult to piece together, like a mosaic shattered and partially burned. Yet, when painstakingly reassembled, the overall picture they paint is one of a desperate technological pursuit, a shadow race fought not with Spitfires and bombs, but in the clandestine labs and the dark, blitzed fields of England. Inside the recovered folder lie the precious remnants of this forgotten history, partially burned pages with edges like fine lace, faded ink that barely adheres to the brittle paper, and the meticulous, precise technical drawings of British wartime engineers who had suddenly been forced into a state of panic-driven analysis. The contents, a snapshot of intelligence at the highest level of urgency in 1940, can be grouped into four crucial, interconnected categories, each confirming the existential crisis the discovery represented. These drawings represent the technical heart of the file. They are the initial, hurried forensic reports. The sketches are highly detailed, utilizing complex engineering conventions, depicting a piece of equipment roughly the size of a small suitcase, compact, robust, and clearly designed for airborne use. The object is clearly not an armament, but a complex electronic or electromechanical aid designed to enhance the effectiveness of the human crew. The key features highlighted in the drawings include a massive, central gyroscopic core, indicating a need for extreme stability and orientation data. Multiple antennae connections and shielded wiring conduits, suggesting the simultaneous processing of several radio inputs. A series of cryptic calibration dials and a small, complex optical or display screen, suggesting real-time feedback to the navigator or bombardier. Experts examining these sketches today are unified in their assessment. The device was a prototype navigation or precision targeting system. It was likely an early version of a highly sophisticated, multi-beam radio navigation system, an intellectual successor to the systems already causing trouble. To understand the British alarm, one must first recall the systems the Luftwaffe was already employing. These included the Nickbane crooked leg system, which used two intersecting radio beams transmitted from mainland Europe to pinpoint a target, and the even more accurate X-Garrett X apparatus, which used a rapid sequence of pulsed beams and required a dedicated receiver computer. These technologies were already effective, helping bombers find their way through the often thick British cloud cover and the blackout. However, the recovered device, which was referred to internally by a British intelligence code name in the file, possibly Ariel or Phoenix, suggests a next-generation leap that left the British scrambling. It wasn't just better, it was different. Its revolutionary components likely incorporated a true gyroscopic inertial platform, a highly advanced internal guidance system for mid-flight stabilization. This would allow for finer, steadier bombing runs regardless of violent evasive maneuvers, turbulence, or severe atmospheric conditions. The error tolerance would be reduced dramatically, enabling the pilot to fly a perfectly stable path to the target, even if the exterior visibility was zero. A highly sensitive multi-lock receiver. A radio receiver capable of locking onto multiple converging radio signals, perhaps 4 or even 6, at once, rather than the 2 used by Nick Bain. By processing the phase difference between these beams, the device could give the crew real-time, 3-dimensional plotting data, not just where they were, but exactly the angle and distance to the target drop point. Integrated computing mechanisms. Though primitive by modern standards, likely electro-mechanical integrators and gear-driven calculating drums, these components were revolutionary for 1940. They calculated crucial factors like wind drift, altitude variance, and target lead automatically, removing the human error element from the crucial moment of bomb release. The horrifying realization for the British was the potential impact. If Germany had managed to deploy this device widely across its bomber fleet, the impact on the Blitz would have been catastrophic and devastating. Instead of relying on general area bombing, which, while deadly, was often inefficient in hitting military targets, the Luftwaffe could have achieved surgical strikes with horrifying consistency. This would have meant the precise destruction of key British facilities. The remaining operational radar stations along the coast, which were the sine qua non of the defense, the fighter command centers at airfields like Biggin Hill and North Weald, the engine manufacturing plants that kept the Spitfires in the air, and crucial naval docks and fuel reserves. The air war would have been altered fundamentally, moving from a battle of attrition to a battle of surgical decapitation, and the defense of Britain would have been all but impossible. The margin of victory, which was already razor-thin in 1940, threatened to be completely erased. The file doesn't rely on just the physical device. It contains the most compelling proof of the device's operational importance, fragments of intelligence that must have caused a simultaneous shudder and rush of adrenaline at Whitehall. These fragments are carbon copies of high-grade intercepts, the vital flow of communication from the German High Command. Though the immediate source is carefully obscured, referred to only by a departmental code, the implication is clear. This intelligence came from the code-breaking efforts at Bletchley Park. The messages, though brief, heavily coded, and filled with deliberately confusing jargon, speak of operational tests completed for the new guidance apparatus, the superiority of the new guidance package, and its successful employment under adverse conditions, and, most tellingly, immediate, high-priority directives to field commanders to prioritize recovery efforts for any downed aircraft carrying the specified serial numbers of the new device. The sheer urgency of the German commands underscores their desperate need to prevent the technology from falling into British hands. The fact that the British were able to link these coded communications directly to the recovered prototype device shows a staggering, immediate intelligence analysis effort. It wasn't just a piece of debris, it was a confirmed component of a major, active German weapons program. This confirmed the existential threat. The file offers a rare glimpse into the psychological toll this discovery took on the technical personnel who were the first to understand it. The file contains surprisingly emotional, though heavily redacted, testimony from the RAF engineers who first recovered and examined the device in the field and the labs. Their statements speak not of a technological curiosity, but of profound alarm and a sense of sudden, irreversible inferiority. One particularly chilling extract reads, "The complexity of the internal wiring, the quality of the lens-grade components, surpasses anything we have yet produced. We are, technologically, at least 12 months behind them on this front. This must be addressed immediately by the highest priority task force." The 12-month deficit was a lifetime in wartime technology, especially in 1940. Another statement speaks of the immediate fear that, the juries have found a way to nullify the cloud cover, they can see through the weather now. Our defense is blind. This was the fear that the precision system, combined with existing German radio beams, would effectively pierce the British reliance on fog and cloud cover to protect targets. These visceral reactions from the technical experts confirm the immediate terror the device sparked at the most knowledgeable level. They were not simply relaying facts, they were conveying a prophecy of disaster. This section forms the conclusion of the British intelligence evaluation, the final, devastating verdict. It is a brief, clinical summary of the device's potential capabilities, its probable operational impact, and the recommended countermeasures which likely led to the immediate funding of advanced British radio countermeasures. Crucially, this summary bears a clear, red stamp and the stark, unforgettable handwritten phrase, "unacceptable for dissemination." This label was not a standard security classification like top secret or most guarded. It was an internal, political order to block the information not only from the enemy but from most of the British government itself. The information was deemed too toxic for consumption by anyone outside a tiny, tight-knit circle. The purpose was specifically to prevent it from reaching the ears of politicians, mid-level staff, and public figures who might inadvertently trigger the very national panic Churchill dreaded. The consensus among modern experts is clear. The discovery of the aerial prototype confirmed that Germany possessed the potential for a technological leap in precision targeting that the British were only beginning to contemplate. The RAF's desperate success in the Battle of Britain was, in part, due to the German inability to consistently hit hardened, dispersed targets. They hit cities, not factories. The aerial prototype threatened to erase that crucial margin of error, making the decisive defeat of Britain a real possibility. The story of the Churchill Directive and the aerial file is fundamentally a story of dual survival, the survival of a nation in 1940 and the survival of a secret for 80 years. So why, given the absolute, unyielding nature of the Prime Minister's order, did this crucial, existential secret survive the official, absolute order of destruction? The answer is simple, profound, and a testament to the quiet moral courage found deep within the machinery of the state, because one unnamed officer believed history deserved the truth. This individual, whose identity remains a mystery, his name protected by the very anonymous methods of his own meticulous archiving, was a man of deep intellectual conviction. He understood the exigencies of wartime, the immediate, terrifying necessity of maintaining national morale, and the genuinely terrifying risk posed by the device itself. He accepted that Churchill's order was tactically correct for 1940, that the immediate release of the information would have been catastrophic. But he also operated under the higher, deeper of the historian and the archivist, that the full, unvarnished truth of a nation's struggle, including its closest shaves with defeat, must, eventually, be preserved for posterity. He could not, in good conscience, erase the moment the war almost pivoted against them. The officer saved the file at great personal risk. Had his act of defiance been discovered, he would have faced the severest charges, potentially even treason and execution, in a time of total war. He risked everything not for personal gain, but for the integrity of the historical record. His act of calculated, quiet rebellion allowed him to disappear into the vast, anonymous historical record, leaving behind only the undeniable proof of his courage. The file he saved, the thin brown folder, now opened and analyzed, has not simply added a fascinating footnote to the history of the Battle of Britain. It has fundamentally rewritten what we thought we knew about the early war, introducing a new, terrifying variable into the equation of Britain's survival. It reveals that the fight was not just between the Spitfires and the Messerschmitts, but between the technological prowess of the Axis and the fragile psychological stability of the Allied home front. As new revelations surface, as the sketches are digitized, the witness statements reconciled with known historical events, and the intercepted codes are re-examined, one thing becomes chillingly, brilliantly clear. Winston Churchill wasn't just fighting a war of armies and aircraft, he was fighting a war of secrets. He was fighting a propaganda war, a morale war, and a technological race in the dark, often against his own timetable. The destruction of the aerial file was not an act of censorship born of shame or guilt, but a tactical strike, a calculated maneuver to keep a nation's head high by convincing it that the war was winnable, even if the intelligence on his desk screamed otherwise. He had to be the nation's unshakable rock, and some secrets were too heavy to share with those who were fighting and dying. This recovery proves that even the most powerful leaders cannot wholly erase the truth. It reminds us that history is often guarded not by governments, but by the quiet defiance of individuals, the humble archivist or analyst who chose principle over safety. The file is a testament to the shadows of the war, a silent monument to the secret war that raged beneath the official one. And this, truly, is the one secret he hoped the world would never see, not because of shame, but because of fear. A fear that has now finally been laid to rest, giving us the complete, complex, and astonishing picture of Britain's darkest hour.